Hey, what's going on, everybody? Speaking
How's it going?
specifically, Evan. Hey, Evan, how's it going?
I'm doing good. People are
Evan,
trickling in now.
people trickle in. We got almost perfect start time. That's nice. And then you're wearing your Tequila Sunrise shirt today.
Yeah, it gets purple.
We'll never find out. It's too low.
You'll never know.
Too inappropriate for office hours.
That's the late office hours.
Right. All right.
After office hours.
That's after hours PM. All right, we're gonna do straight to business on this one because this one has a lot of people that want to talk about our hot topic, which is probably the API. I think most people that are signed up for this are here to talk about the API, learn about what we're thinking, and hopefully we get some good data out of you guys mining you for data. Shh, don't tell yourselves that. All right, so official intros. Welcome to Office Hours. I'm Ricky Cecchini, the VP of Product. With me on screen right now is Evan Griffith. You are the Director of Customer Success, last I checked. And we brought a mystery guest. He'll join us in a little bit. That's David Falkenberg. That is a new product director. What? Yes, he's going to help us talk about, build out, and discuss the approach for the API. And again, hopefully you good people are here to listen in, get some ideas, but also collaborate, get us some use cases, and we'll show you kind of what we're thinking and how that all goes. If it's your first office hours, wow, congrats. Let's talk about what it is. We're talking about CloudRadial stuff. Obviously, if you couldn't tell, informally, I'm not a suit and tie guy. Learning some best practices. So if stuff comes up, then we talk about processes, we talk about features, we talk about anything in that realm. We'll tell you what the old manufacturer recommended specs and what other people are doing successfully in those different facets. That's this place to do it. Place to share your thoughts. So if there are things between peers that come up when we want to talk about how other people are using the product or any kind of peer-to-peer stuff, feel free to throw it in the chat in the QA. We'll bring it up. We'll talk it through. And again, it's a place to see us and just kind of have a conversation. It's not super serious. We're not super strict about everything. Evan says, how's everybody doing in the chat? Nice. Thanks for kicking it off, Evan. And if something comes up from this happens quite a bit. And if you make a point, you ask a question, something, and we don't get to it, not the end of the world. I pick up and I answer it, and I get the chat and QA and stuff from this recording, and I'll hit you back up after. And if we do watch this recorded webinar on YouTube or wherever else you see it, that's cool too. The questions and stuff that we talk about during this live stuff, they get repeated and or sometimes even modified slightly for our audience that couldn't make it. If you're in Australia or maybe in the UK or just couldn't make it in general, you're not missing out if you can't answer it live on here. All right. So if you're going to the actual office hour stuff, first things first, product update. Hey, wait a minute, we missed last month. So if you are a regular office hours person, what happened last month? Last month, we had a bunch of conferences. I myself was out at a few. Actually went to HubSpot in Boston, which was nice. We were talking about some marketing stuff, but in the meantime, we kind of missed out. So we're catching up for a bunch of things. Namely, let's talk about the super high level because there's been a bunch of little things, but I want to stick to the big stuff that CloudRadial has been working on. Honestly, not the sexiest, but really important for us. And I'll tell you why and how that relates to the API. So the refactoring of our code has been a huge lift. And it's causing a few issues that you may have seen. And if not, we may continue to see. We're kind of in a maintenance mode where we're taking a lot of the connections that we have to our PSAs currently, and we're just cleaning all of it up and scaling it up. Our team is much more mature than they used to be, which means that we're trying to get a lot of these developers that we hire up to speed faster, which means that if you've ever worked with Jeff Ferris, our CEO, who coded it originally, that's good. But a lot of the stuff he did now is needing to be understood by a team of many people. So if you've ever worked in development, you know that that's something we got to work through. So we're going through refactoring all of it. Some of the stuff that comes from that is some of the PSAs end up having like misfires, and that's pretty much always on our end at this point, where it's like sometimes fields don't map over, whatever. We're going through and patching that up. And again, we're almost through this big project where we're just trying to make the thing more stable as a whole, because we've had speed concerns in the past, we've had stability. We are fixing all that stuff. We are working through each one of these things, but it takes time. So that's been a pretty major function. And again, unfortunately, I usually put out a KB article and I put out the alert for, hey, here's what we've been working on, and we'll have like feature. But right now we're kind of in a polish mode where we say, let's just make this thing run better and then add to what we have. I think that'll be a big thing. So
yeah, so if you guys, if you run into any issues, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our team can make sure that we can tie it to the right thing and make sure we get you guys, the information you need when we have resolutions to any of those issues.
For sure. Yeah, and let's talk about CloudRadial storefront. Now, CloudRadial now, it used to be CloudRadial is synonymous with the client portal, and that's it. Now, CloudRadial today is kind of a bunch of different products that we sell under an umbrella. And what we used to just call CloudRadial is now primarily the CSA, that's the client portal. And usually when we talk about the other products that we have in CloudRadial, like chat or like DNS, those are kind of like add-ons that you can have, but they are add-ons, right? They're optional and you pay for them and all that stuff. CloudRadial Storefront is another one of those that's optional as an add-on, but you get a free version. So I figured that for office hours, it's nice to talk about what that means and how you can actually use it off the bat. That launches at the end of the month. So I wanted to show a little bit more about that because we did talk about it a couple months ago as kind of like an initiative, and there was like some very high level things. I want to talk about what it really means, and then we're going to get the rest of the call is going to be all about the API, which again, I assume a lot of people are here for. So we'll keep this relatively brief. I'm not going to bury the lead too much, but I figure some people want to know about this. So let's pull up the old
Absolutely. It's a big deal.
portal. Can you see that, Evan? Let me know.
Yep. Looks good.
Sweet. So Evan and I have been doing a couple things. So we've been working on the storefront, and it's something that we're working in collaboration with a vendor called Adaptive Catalog. It's a lot of stuff to it, but the gist is we wanted to turn CloudRadial into a proper storefront. The evolution of CloudRadial has been pretty clear about how we've been trying to go about it, right? We've had the service catalog things since the start. You can go in here and put in your tickets for like order hardware, right? Super basic example. And this just creates a ticket, fine. But if you wanted to add more power to it, that's when the more savvy CloudRadial users will go in and build their tickets to maybe fire off webhooks. And then we start talking about stuff like sending it off to RPA platforms like Rooster Pia or your own workflows, you name it. But basically trying to use CloudRadial as a link in the chain to get stuff to provision, right? But what that's always left out is A, it requires a bunch of knowledge, and B, it's not always super clear about how the systems pick up. And like in general, every time you put something in a big chain, when the links break, it's kind of a pain to go back and fix it. So it has been possible, but we've been working slowly to make it more and more accessible so that ultimately users can log into a portal, click a thing, and it does indeed set you up for success to ship, create, sell that thing. So this is the most basic. We did our drag and drop automations that got us a little bit closer. So we talked about those a while ago too, where you could add additional power through your webhooks and opportunity creation that gets you closer. But again, you still have to do a little bit more work. So storefront is our kind of like end all be all to say like, okay, so what if you literally got to flip a button and turn it into Amazon? How would that work? And how can we get it even easier? So ultimately what that looks like today is that at the end of the month, what you're going to get is under your integrations, you're going to rock the old storefront, and storefront is going to create an actual store for you. And when you have that store created, again, I'm skipping over the technicalities because I just want to show you what it actually does, is you're going to be able to create a button on the homepage like I do. You can call it whatever you want. You can put your own icon, your own text or whatever. When you get to that store, what we've done is we've taken the user data from the users that's logged in, first name, last name, the company, the PSA ID and stuff, and caveat. Right now, the only ones that we support are PSA-wise to get storefront to work properly are going to be ConnectWise PSA, Autotask, and then also Kaseya BMS. We're working on Synchro and Halo. We're working with Adaptive Catalog to get that working, but right now those are the three confirmed that work today that should be live and ready to go by the end of October. So having said that, when I launch into the store, what happens is the user gets in there and they get into an actual store, right? Now, this stuff is pretty interesting because these products that we're seeing, right? If I am the actual user, I can change the branding, I can change the name, I can change the taglines, all that other stuff. I can literally just start adding stuff to my cart as if it was Amazon, right? So I can start saying, yep, add to cart, let's go about that. All right, let's do it. More importantly, more interestingly, and something that came up for a lot of people is the idea of bundles. So especially when you have like something like a new user, or I don't know, like really you name it. I always use new user as an example, but whatever type of bundle you want, you can stick stuff together, and maybe that includes a bunch of stuff. And I've got my 3 lame examples here. So at the end of this month, you're going to be able to build this out yourself. Now, we have different versions of storefront, and I'll show what those actually mean in a second, but let's just go through the experience to give you an idea of how it works. So I added one, I think it was just the cable in there. That's cool. Modify the stuff as I want. and then I'll go to checkout and I can drop additional things. None. So a lot of the stuff here is customizable. So I'm just going to do test, 1, 2, 3, Fake Street in Test City, but Texas. And let's put a bunch of bold. Hey, the order went through, or it should. Ta-da. So what just happened? So I just literally set myself up for an ordering of a cable. And I did a bunch of other stuff too. What that ultimately has done is I, as a user, have gone in, bought stuff, bundled stuff, sent it through, and then as I finish up in the storefront, that quote has actually been created and is now inside of the PSA. In this case, we're ConnectWise, and it's shown back up in here, and we can actually see that stuff pull back up, closed loop. So this is kind of the bare minimum you can do. There's more interesting use cases, but that has shown a loop where you can put a product up there, put the description, let them buy it, and then it's gone ahead and put that opportunity inside of your PSA with the stuff they want, with statuses that you choose, and so on and so forth. A little bit of technical, just to show you guys how it actually works. If you do it on the free version, which is what everybody gets at the end of the month, you are pulling in those products that you saw here from, from your own PSA products list. And that's, I think, pretty good to get an idea, a use case of how this can work. The real power in here is when you hook up your distributors. So if you work with Ingram Micro, TD Synnex, D&H, Pax8, you can actually have their products pull in per your decision, right? And the whole concept here is like no more pain in the butt trying to figure out how those things, if those things are in stock. Adaptive catalog, which again is the back end of the search, is searching across however many distributors you want, pulling in those images, pulling in the descriptions, just getting the idea of you know, what people want to see and learn about that product and dropping it in here for ease of use. And then when we go to actually manage the store, I'm going to show a little bit of that. We can go back into our integration storefront. When I go to manage said storefront, what happens? So we can choose exactly which ones we want to pop into the store. So if it lets us in that SSO, please don't make me SSO in a webinar. Nice. Okay. So when we go in and we build our storefront out, it's pretty easy to set up. We've been working these past 2 months on not only testing the functionality, making sure it works smoothly, but also making sure we can build the documentation and the implementation of this. We wanted it to be really easy, something you could pick up and do in like an hour or 2 tops, not something you have to work weeks and weeks and weeks on prepping everything. So it's pretty good. I mean, it's really come down to something that we're really proud of, where you can, again, brand it the way you want. You can choose even the payment process. Right now, we're working with Stripe. So if you want, you can actually have them check out properly with Stripe. If you don't want them to just create the opportunity and you want them to go a step further and actually put payment info in there, you can. And again, the way that you actually set that up and build that out is, again, you can choose exactly how often to, to import in the details of the products, how often to, or I'm sorry, what to call the opportunities as they get created. Again, kind of the customization you would expect from an opportunity generation. And when it comes to the actual catalog of stuff you put up in front of them, adaptive catalog is a whole spiel on why their stuff is really special. But the gist is, again, you can kind of set the criteria of what you're looking for rather than the individual thing. So if instead of saying, I want a Lenovo so-and-so model with this, and it's out of stock everywhere, you can kind of say, like, as long as it has an i7 and it's got X amount of RAM and so on and so forth, that'll match the criteria, show up whatever's available. So this dynamic concept of a storefront makes it not only possible for you to always show the right stuff, it makes it available, it makes it in stock, it makes it a good user experience. And also it makes sure that, like, as we set these things up, right? So this is kind of poor examples, but let's just do my Surface that I always use as my example. Hey, cool. Again, this one's pulling from the PSA. You can, as you add it to the workspace and you kind of decide whether you want it in the storefront or not, you can put minimums on it. So you make sure that you never have to eat costs on stuff. You can put your markup amounts, and then you can also build specific storefronts per clients, which means that you can have a general one. You can have individual ones. If you know that, you know, your bigger clients or a specific client has a completely different need, all that stuff is built in there. So super stoked to end up showing this off. Again, it's a little early because we're 2 weeks prior to launch, but something that we've been working on is, again, the functionality has been pretty nice. The usability is really good. Again, I'm pretty proud of this one. And then we've been working on building out the documentation, like I said. So if you actually go into our knowledge base, if you ever see stuff in here, there's a new section for it. And the biggest kind of workaround that has to happen, I'll just be upfront with you guys, because this is what we're working on for implementation, is that we are basically trying to figure out how to smooth the process, not with the storefront setup, but with the implementation of the distributor setups, because the distributors are kind of out of our hands. Example, when we go to like Ingram Micro, a lot of the stuff that we depend on is getting API connections to their stuff. And a lot of that depends on your relationship with that distributor. It depends on how fast they get back to you, how fast they give you an API, how fast they give you like the price files and stuff. So this says it all on how we do these things and how it all works. And that's well and good, but we're working on, again, making sure that process is super clear and you can plug and play and get stuff going. But we're really stoked, not just because storefronts are cool, which they are, but because we know that this actually does a couple things. For one, it's something that sells more stuff, right? And we all like more money coming in. Why not? But secondly, it's something that actually we really think will drive a lot of people to the portal, right? Because the secret sauce here is that by getting into the portal is how they get SSO'd in there. And by having that kind of authentication take care of itself, there's more reason to visit around and use your other features, right? The other stuff that you may have built and worked on is kind of a portal view into it. So big plans for storefront and how it'll evolve, I'm not quite sure yet, right? I mean, I know we want to make it more available to not just the current PSAs that we're working on, even if we can make it more generic, but obviously right now for products and opportunities and whatnot, we just worked with our base. But that's the gist of where storefront's at. Again, I'm pretty excited, and I think that we're going to be talking about it. CloudRadial will be at both DataCon in Miami, and then we're also going to IT Nation in Orlando. So we'll have more details there, and we'll talk about it more as well. So look for that, again, coming out by the end of the month, and you should have it live. And again, more details and support and implementation on our side, we'll know about it. So heads up.
And Jasper had a quick question about payment processors. Are we,
Sure.
he just wanted to know if we are eventually going to support more than just Stripe, or I don't think we have any plans right now, but
Well, we
we're
talked about it.
definitely always looking for opportunities.
Yeah, the adaptive people are the ones that are actually working with Stripe specifically to do it, just because Stripe is really easy to plug and play in. But once we have this thing up and rolling, like on our side, right, and we have data coming in, I'll probably run a separate office hours or just a poll at some point. I don't know if it's December, probably like earlier at the beginning of next year, once it actually people have used it, and then just to get an idea of what the most valuable one would be and whatnot. Because I think that, yeah, like payment processors is cool. Ultimately, right now, the loop that you kind of go through is people get it, you know the items in stock, you know where it's coming from, you have the opportunity created, and that's all cool. But the final thing that Adaptive Catalog offers as a separate thing from this is they can go through and even do the procurement and everything for it, the actual shipment part. But for right now, we're just setting the scope to can we get that experience really well, and that will come with the payment processor. So yeah, Jasper, for sure.
Right. So and then also once we have the storefront like officially up, probably even after this webinar, we can make it available. Adding your feature request for that specific thing you're looking for storefront can be really helpful for us as well. Because then other, me always plugging in the feature requests, but other partners can also add their 2 cents. So anything that everybody wants is always going to get a little more eyes on it.
Yeah, and this is going to be a good one because the new stuff that we push out usually gets more eyeballs. Because again, we're looking at this with 2 companies, not just CloudRadial, which is nice because the folks at Adaptive, I mean, I'll tell you firsthand, like fast, like the amount of times I went through and I found a bug in this and then they fixed it like same day, couple days is like remarkable. I'm not saying they turn features around that fast, but if their track record holds, they're zippy when it comes to adding new stuff, which is nice. We like to see that. Okay. So let's get to the meat of it. Hey, how long did I take? 20 minutes? That's pretty fast for me. That's not a long monologue.
Yeah, that was good. I didn't interrupt though either, or I barely did.
I know.
So
Hey, keep it down. No, I'm just kidding. This is your part now. We're going to talk about it. So the big meat of today's webinar is actually in preparing for our API project, something we've been working on for a while, but now we're really, really, really serious about it. And I'll tell you why. It's because what does it mean to work on an API? And specifically, what does it mean to work on CloudRadial's API? So let's talk about that. Now, I already did the demo, but I would like to introduce David, I call him Dave, our new product director. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Really good, thanks. Just getting my video here fired up.
I was about to say, we all work in the same office. We all have the same exact, in the same spot. I think that's Evan's usual joke. Do your background.
Looks like we're in the same room.
Yeah.
And David's joining us to help out with product. Specifically, you know, the first project we're all kind of working on together is this API stuff, but I'd like to ask you to tell a little bit about yourself, what you've worked on in the past, and prove to people that you are not a product director. You've definitely worked product. Tell me about your product histories.
Yeah, I've been doing product work for far too many years now. I think 15, 16 years.
Nice.
Been with companies like Intuit, Smart Technologies, H&R Block. I've worked with a couple of startups, touched on several different industries, several different products, been all over the place, and really, really excited to be joining CloudRadial and diving in here.
Yeah, man. And one of the reasons we're stoked to have David in general is because when you get a fresh set of eyes on this stuff, it's really refreshing because he's have you worked with MSP? I mean, I think you've heard the term MSP prior to CloudRadial, right? Or is this all brand new? Remind me again.
I'd heard the term MSP before. Throughout my product career, I've actually sat in IT. I've worked with VPs of IT. I've been in companies that use MSPs. This is my first time building software specifically for MSPs, but I have a pretty good handle on the landscape. And the rest of what I do as a product guy is dive in, talk to customers, learn the space. And so my lack of knowledge of MSPs right now is actually an asset because it's going to force me to dig deeper and ask more questions.
And that's why Dave's on office hours, because we're here to show him kind of how stuff works, you know, how we chit chat with you guys and how things pop up. But again, Dave's been really killer so far. We've been talking about things relating to the product, to the use cases, and that's the meat of today's conversation. So if the topic of the month is CloudRadial API, I want to give a little bit of history and spend time on the future. So the history of the API, for those that don't know, I'm going to lay it out so at least I can refer people to this webinar when they go, what's the deal with that thing? It's historically been hyper limited. So if anyone here has tried to use the API or wondered why we have the API that we have, it's because we really don't have an API, right? Or we haven't. The things that we do have right now have been so purpose built for specific use cases. And really that's a factor of like when you're bootstrapping it and people say like, hey, I could really stand to send some reports into your archive, or I could really stand to define some tokens. But those have been such hyper specific use cases that those that need that and magically aligns with their own goals have been like, neat, they have it. And the majority of people that go like, that doesn't really accomplish what I want, have found it useless, right? So there's been some frustrations around the API that we know of, but we've decided, especially earlier this year, that we really wanted to double down, fix it, and find some use cases. So we're here today largely to take a look at what you guys are looking for, and not just like, it'd be cool if you worked with this, it'd be cool if you let me get company data, but to really talk through some of the use cases that we can get to in the product. And I also want to talk about something else, which is, why is it taking so long? Because we've worked on this. We've said we've been working on it. Have we lied the entire time? No, unfortunately not. It's been taking us a few months because we've been working on a lot of things. And this is this part where I think Dave, Evan, and I can bring our own perspectives. Obviously, Dave has a ton of product knowledge. And again, MSP or not, he's done these types of things before, right? He's done the work to get this successful. So he brings in the considerations that a lot of us, me specifically, don't really know, don't really walk into. I've talked to a lot of you guys personally one-on-one. I know a lot of the requests. Evan works with you guys a bunch. The feature requests are his baby as well, right? He watches a lot of them. So we know a lot of the use cases, but I'm here to see what you guys today want and not just ones that somebody said once 4 years ago. So let's talk through some of these and talk about why the considerations are not as easy, again, as posting a post and get to a specific thing and that. So integration, capability, and use cases. I'll go first on this one. We get a lot of requests for integrations with people, and we can't keep up. I think, Evan, you have that. Do you still have that feature request pulled up that you talked about before the call about the knowledge base?
Yeah.
You had
So our main one is, I mean, basically, it's actually a really good request. It's the most voted for too, but it's CloudRadial tries way too much, and there's a lot of our partners in general is what he's saying is you don't want to get rid of some of your tools. You like them and you want them to do well with CloudRadial, which right now means you're asking us to integrate like natively or directly with it, which can be tough. But if we opened up our API for this example is a KB article being able to be updated through the API so that they can have one source for article documentation instead of having to recreate documents in multiple locations. It could be really powerful. And I mean, if you think about just that concept of one source, multiple locations. Sometimes your source, actually a lot of times, even users, we don't source them in CloudRadial. So if we can source other things without having to have a direct integration, that can be really helpful. So just the KB article example, it's called CloudRadial Custom Integrations API. It's your most generic request that we have, but that one specifically has a good, it basically kind of covers everything that you'd want an API to be able to do, depending on what vendors or softwares you're using.
Yeah, I think that again, when I go to conferences, and I go to conferences not just to talk to you guys, because I know again, I run into you guys, I run into people that don't obviously make the webinar all the time. And one of the interesting things is I go to webinars to talk to other vendors a lot. And the other vendors, we talk about how we can work together, because a lot of times what happens is, we're trying to be this everything client kind of platform. And what that means is we take the best data, the best relevant client facing data from other vendors in addition to our own stuff, and present it in the best, most sensical, hopefully most sexy way that actually looks good. And when we talk about the API stuff, that comes up all the time, going like, well, what does an integration, right? I get people personally reaching out to me saying, I'd love to work with you. I'm so-and-so from this backup and disaster recovery company. And what usually happens is I go like, okay, where do you want me to put the data, right? Even in the UI. And two, what are we really doing with that data? So a lot of the stuff that the integration capabilities comes through on is, what are we actually going to use for it? Because that's going to lead me into point two. So we know that a lot of times what we want to do with the APIs, we want to give respective vendors, like the people that come up, again, the amount of companies that come up out of the woodwork that we don't know of, right? There's the big ones that we do that, vendors that you like, that you bring to us and say, please integrate me, have conversations with them. And then there's the cool new ones that we can't keep up with, because we can't get the developers to drop everything they're doing and stop working on improvements or bug fixes or whatever to go work on new integrations and stuff. So we wanted to open up the API to some respect to let those this next point is the thing for Dave. I want to have this conversation with you, which is even that, in addition to other stuff, can it affect the usability? So when we talk about UI, UX, I know that if, opening the floodgates and going here, open up CloudRadial to put in whatever data is going to make it unwieldy. It's already kind of a lot of stuff to show. So like when you talk about an API, even when we talk about it, how do you even go about approaching how that affects the UI, UX? I mean, do you start defining where you put the data in, or where do you begin with API versus UI?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a really interesting space as well. Lots of people just think API, they think on the code side of things. But when I look at our UI today, it's a bit scattered. There's a lot of stuff, and layering in more features and layering in more things and just inserting more menu options isn't necessarily going to be a good approach. It will work functionally, yes, but I think overall, one of my observations being new to CloudRadial is that we do have some usability challenges with the existing UI, and the more stuff we want to try and layer and bolt into that, the more challenging it's going to be. So as we build out the API, we are going to have to figure out which pieces of the UI we want to open up to allow things to be inserted. Initially, we're mostly looking at data. Let's use the API to bring more data in. I've heard lots of discussion around bringing in more endpoints, bringing in endpoints from other sources of data. So we can bring those endpoints in, and that kind of dovetails into the existing UI that we've got. There's a lot to it.
Well, we talked about, and this is something we talked about in previous office hours, that, in addition to the API stuff, something that Dave and Jeff and myself and Evan and even our CTO, Renee, are working on is the concept of, we talked about it, Partner Center, which is this global overview of the data that comes into CloudRadial. And we're thinking that a lot of the API stuff is really important, because to summarize, like Dave's saying, like a bunch of endpoint data that we're going to pipe in, say we do pull in stuff from an RMF or wherever it may come from. How do we visualize that in a way that you actually understand it and it adds value is a big UI thing, right? You don't want to make this thing monstrous. So in your eyes, Dave, again, you're hearing it from him. He just joined CloudRadial. Like, do we need a bigger dashboard? Do we need a way to visualize all this stuff? I think burial of data is kind of the key term here that we're running into.
Yeah, that's definitely been one of my observations, and I've talked about it a lot internally over the couple of weeks I've been here. You mentioned earlier in this call, bury the lead, and I think that one of my observations is we tend to do that a lot through the product directly. There's a whole bunch of really, really interesting capabilities and value that we provide to MSPs that's 4 or 5 menu layers deep. I'm looking in the chat here, Ryan. Yes, UI is a huge thing, and 4 windows open to see all relevant information at once. As someone new to CloudRadial and going through onboarding and trying to figure out how it works in the first place, I hear you on that one.
It
It
is.
can be a daunting task, that's for sure.
Well, it's really funny when you run a new person through, CloudRadial, like obviously Dave is a product guy, and he goes, "Oh, I know why I got hired." And it's like, "Yeah, you do." Cool. And it's kind of the stuff, if anyone's used Autotask, where it's like pops up a window every now and then. Like there's these things in our industry that, like, I would say, I don't know why, but historically, a lot of our tools just have these like really weird kind of suboptimal UXs in general. But again, that's a big concern, right? Because again, yes, we know that our partners, after conversations, after the stuff we're going to talk about, we know that you're using it in certain ways, and the UI is a concern. So yes, we're focusing on making sure that stuff isn't necessarily buried all the way through, but big thing. Now, I'll swap over to something else that we have to talk about, which has been an issue we fixed, and it will be an issue if we don't define it properly, which is performance, which is if you want your tenant to run nicely and to work better, we're refactoring stuff to speed it up, and sometimes that comes with hiccups, but overall it's a net positive. You can choke stuff out, right? You can overload the heck out of your tenant by flooding it with data, right? So making sure that the API is not only sensical, but also performant is a huge thing. Because again, on Evan's side of things, we're not that big of a company, which means that we can't take super huge, you can't take all of our tickets on dealing with specific API data. So we're also cognizant that if we just open the floodgates and people just kind of destroy their own portal with a bunch of stuff, we're going to have to dedicate a bunch of time to try to fix that and understand what's going on. So there's also that level of care that we have to be careful. So we have to know exactly what the API can do, can't do, and kind of fail safes for it.
Yeah, that's a really important consideration as well, is that we are a small company. So one of the reasons that I see this API as critical for us to launch is we can't build all of the integrations. We can't build all of the things that we're being asked to build right now. And fortunately, we have a customer base that is highly technical. So opening an API logically makes sense to extend that capabilities and enable us as a whole to go faster.
Yeah, and that's the other big concern, which obviously, like, surprise, CloudRadial is designed to be accessible to clients. And we know, like, again, I'm not saying anything that's going to blow anyone's mind, but it takes very little to make someone think, like, about a piece of software. And like performance is a big deal, right? So performance of the application as a whole is one thing, but like we see it with PSAs today, right? And again, I'm not going to pick on them because they're doing anything wrong, but like Autotask has some issues with their APIs where could there be performance things that we could tweak and whatever? Yes, sure. But we've seen that a lot of times when you return a bunch of data, it can go kind of slowly. So example, we load up some of the dashboards from their data and they can take longer to load than some of the other PSAs. Okay. And even though it's fine when you're the one going, it takes 5 seconds, 5 seconds might as well be 5 years for a regular user. So there's that kind of stuff to determine.
Yeah.
That go ahead, Evan. We've seen that more than
Yeah, I mean, you have rules for what takes what a performance load is, right? And depending if it's 5 seconds or 20, an end user is used to immediate. Like they're used to picking up their phone and immediately. So anything that takes longer than that, they may already be on the phone with their MSP. So yeah, I understand that completely.
And to further fill that out, for example, when we talk about the API, we talk about the performance. So we need to make sure that, again, obviously integration, the use cases are there. It actually results in a good UX. The performance has to be pretty good. When we did our projects integration, some of the PSAs that we could technically do projects with, we decided not to, or like we decided wouldn't work because the API would be so either unreliable or so poorly performing that I would rather not have a feature than have a feature that literally just doesn't work. It just dies immediately, right? And it's one of those things that like we're trying to go back and improve on the stuff that we do have and make it performant, but we're super cognizant of this because again, the last thing we want is for you to add in stuff and it makes you look bad because it's out of both of our hands. We can't support it. You are plugging stuff in, but the sending sources, it's not working. So there's a lot of considerations there as well. So we want to make sure everything on our side performs quickly. And then this one is another one that Evan and I have dealt with. I'm curious if Dave has anything cool. If not, I won't call him out, but permissions. And That's important because the data you end up putting in CloudRadial from the API. So if we were to quote unquote open up whatever, now all of a sudden it becomes kind of a big challenge with who's seeing that data. How do you make sure that that data is accessible to only the right people? So the permission structure is going to change quite dramatically. We talked about the partner center. We talked about that, the concept of, when I say partner center, it's really like your view as the MSP, as the partner, to be able to see the status of clients as a whole, the status of, you know, the usage of your portal, a lot of stuff that we want to be able to take external data from different sources from the API, put it in there, send stuff out. In general, just make that more homogeneous, but making sure that, like, say, account managers, right? If you're a big enough MSP that you have account management teams can see their respective stuff, or service teams can their respective clients, but also clients can see their respective content, which means that API wise, we've already had discussions, concerns, feature requests around how you control visibility around companies and user groups and content, which is actually where we're probably going to start, because that is going to be a really critical one to making sure that you're not spending a bunch of time configuring CloudRadial and it can kind of work off the bat, right? So permission structures is big for us.
Yeah.
It's something that we want to make sure that we have, because again, that's going to be really tied to security, and we know that that's a paramount concern. So that's another one that we have to be very careful of whenever we do open stuff. Who sees it?
Yeah, I mean, you want account managers to be able to see how much they may make, but you don't want them to be able to change the price of a product in your TSA or distribution. So yeah, there's a lot of things just in the window that you can see that we have to consider being able to link to all this particular permissions and possibly grouping them. So it's definitely something we've already started thinking about and are looking at.
Yeah, and I want to be clear that this is, as the more I say this, the more I'm like, this sounds like an excuse list, kind of. But really, it's more to say that whenever we look at, and we're going to launch the poll here in a second, which we usually do at the end of the call, but I'm going to launch it towards, you know, the 2/3 way. When we take the use cases, I don't want you guys caring about any of this stuff, right? I want you guys talking about the use cases, because that's our job to make sure that the stuff that you request makes it in there in some form or fashion. But I do want to address, because I've got a lot of stuff saying like, you said you were working on it, you're not, or whatever. And it's like, that's just not true. We are, but these things times however many requests takes a bunch, because if we do one of these wrong or multiple wrongs, we all look really bad, right? If the performance sucks, if the security is not there, if the UI is awful, who cares about the API? It doesn't matter. Like, literally none of it matters, which is the last point, value. So if none of these things line up, the value is not there. And we've been guilty of doing this. I think a lot of software is, but I'll totally raise my hand. A lot of times, just because you can check a box off and say you do that thing does not mean it adds value. But now we're, again, with the addition of Dave, with a lot of the structuring that we've been doing on the code side, on our team side, right? We're trying to position ourselves to not say feature buffet, but actually making it usable, making it good experience, making sure that you can actually be proud of what you put in front, and making sure that everything you plug in there has value, right? So there's more things, I'm sure. This is just the list that I thought of to put up for office hours, but this is the stuff that we want to make sure that every single one of these use cases hits before we launch it, before we say, yes, support it. So when you multiply this by the amount of places you could send stuff in, push stuff out, it's a lot. So let me launch that poll. Let me see. Usually Evan does it, but I'll try.
Oh, did I miss the I was just
No.
listening to you. I didn't know if I missed the
Say,
keyword.
I'm so enraptured. No, I'm gonna talk through it. So before you answer this, I'd like to discuss what's going on. So the question is actually pretty simple. The first question is really relevant to it. So it's talking about what type of data you'd like to see integrated into your portal from the API. What I'm looking for here, I know it's super simple, is really like, what is the priority? So like, if you had to pick the top one, right? Obviously there's going to be all over the place. What is the number one thing you're really trying to get in the portal to show value to clients, right? Is it, I'll just pick random ones, right? Are you trying to pull in more details of users? So again, is it their details from Microsoft? Is it details from some other source of data that you have, some documentation? Or are we trying to pull in more agents, like Dave was saying, so more data from endpoints or inventory and so on and so forth, to make sure that they get a better complete set? These kind of key areas are going to help us figure out what part is going to add the most value at the beginning, so we can actually build it out, because I highly doubt we're going to just say everything's open, knock yourselves out, unless Dave tells me that's the best practice. I doubt it. I don't know.
No, it's definitely not a best practice. And the key
Yeah.
with building APIs, and I've built them in the past, is you really need those killer use cases. You really need clarity around achieving a very specific objective. Otherwise, it's a whole bunch of internal think on, hey, let's just expose everything and hope that it's going to work. And
Right.
that's
Which is,
not really a recipe for success.
I think that was one of the things that when we took a big step back and said like, hey, we want to make sure we do this correctly. Let's take a look at how we can actually approach this and give the most value. So what I'm going to do, this is open for this chat. And again, if you're watching the recording of this, you're not missing out. But if you do have use cases, obviously you've been free to use the chat. We've been free to use the Q&A and stuff. What I really want you to do is I don't really care where you put it because we're going to see whether it's in the feature requests, whether it's right here, or what I'm going to do is I usually write out the forms, the Microsoft Forms stuff that comes through the portal. So anybody who has admin access should see this little CloudRadial news, and this is where the in-app pop-ups happen, right? So I push these out and I say like, hey, we're talking about blah, 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 blah. Cool. I'm going to put a spot in there for our survey that I do after every office hours. It's going to say same exact question, and then also a spot to actually write out your use case. So if you need to think about it, if you have one, fire it off here, whatever. We're going to take the results of this poll right here in the Zoom. We're going to take the results of this thing, and we're going to try to build those out and really try to understand it. Again, not just the wish list, but the use case for it. It can be super short, it can be super long, however you want it, so we can really understand where to add value. I see a bunch of people putting in the answers, which is nice. Right now I don't know if you guys can see poll results, but I'll spoil it. Agent RMM inventory reporting is winning by a rather hefty margin, which is great and fine, because then we can start to figure out where we can put the endpoints.
Yeah, Ricky, there's an option that's missing there that I've had on my mind, which is accessing content, the knowledge base articles and training programs and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
In hindsight, probably should have put that on the poll. So if we do publish this,
We can throw that out there for
or
sure.
continue to run it, can we add that in there?
Yes, and then
In the meantime, for those on the call, feel free to fire it in the chat or send me a message or something like that if that is if content's one of the areas that you'd like to see in API.
Yes.
Yeah, we've also got a good feature request that's already on that too. It's got about 20 votes on it for its KB articles to content package, but I think, in general, API to content package, like you said, would be pretty powerful. Because managing content could be updating content and things like that could be a lot more friendly if you had something like that doing it.
Yeah, the idea of content, like we've talked about this before, and again, if you're thinking about writing your use cases, please don't let me interrupt you. But we've had this concept. We talked about it during August's office hours, but we talked about the training conundrum that CloudRadial finds itself in, but we're working our way out, which is really a content problem. So to add on to what both Dave and Evan are saying, it's if you look at content management in CloudRadial and you say, okay, so you've got the ability to create content, being our blanket term for whatever, you can, right? But realistically, it's like if you could pull it from a source, if you could have something informant added in there, that would be better, because then you don't have to do anything except for point it to a place, they put it in there, and magic happens. What we saw with our training, right? Take our Bigger Brains or Clip Training, right? Both of fantastic training providers that add a bunch of value. Is it was really kind of a pain to take their courses, take their content, put it in CloudRadial, publish it out, make sure it stays up to date. And then what I've done, I mean, I've done it for the past 5 years I've been working here. I've had to take additional courses and stuff they pushed out, translate it into content myself, push it back out, and then just disseminate that in some form or fashion. Versus what we're doing now, and this is what we're trying to do, is we're doing like a big button. This is Clip Training example. Bigger Brains will work the same way shortly, where we are basically taking the same concept we did for store, we're passing the information and turning CloudRadial into a one-stop hub. So by doing this version where we just get right in there and we get right into their training platform, we get in there, that is a form of content management, because you are no longer burdened by having to import stuff in, figuring it out, right? Trying to manage a bunch of packages or whatever. If you can link off to stuff, whether you build it internally or you pull it from your own source, this kind of SSO is a really powerful way to keep the portal focused on just being the client touch point, the client base, without having to get lost in the nitty gritty. So I think Dave's right. Probably the big one I'm missing is that content management, but the good news is we're already on that kind of stuff, because we do want to alleviate it. One, for usability for you guys, and two, we want to alleviate our own tenants, right? Our own CloudRadial backend, because we don't want to have to necessarily be pushing out hundreds and thousands of pieces of content over and over again, because that's the stuff that can slow down your tenant, make it crawl and blah, blah, blah. You're pushing out super huge content all the time, right? So we're aware of not only how this API project can enhance your portal, add new stuff that you may have not had before, but we also want to optimize it before. So if we do it right, then the real goal, back to my previous example, is to take this stuff and reapply it to the stuff we already have been using. So improving the integration, say with new training providers, making sure the UI is nice because it matches the training providers, making sure the performance is like better on your tenant because there's no longer that load on your stuff. So the portal loads faster, so it's easier to access. It kind of snowballs. So we do think, you've been telling us forever, so don't tell me you're right, because I know, which we do think that we're not going to be the best at everything, but we do think that we can be the glue to take all the client facing stuff and keep it centralized. So the ultimate point on top of all that is, if you do end up switching out training providers, if you do end up switching out to a different storefront or different service catalog, you want to put in your Roost forms or whatever it may be, that shouldn't matter, right? What should matter is that you have a consistent client experience, consistent behavior. Everything starts off in the same place. And then with what, Dave, Evan, and I, and several others are going to work on, you should be able to see that stuff centralized in your partner center dashboard. So you actually see the usability, you see where the gaps lay. That's more where CloudRadial is moving to. So this stuff, again, I want to thank all of you guys for showing up and for contributing and chit-chatting and everything for the API, is where CloudRadial's got to go. It's not where we're going, it's where we have to go. Well, it is where we're going, but you know what I mean.
And ideally, when you look at your portal homepage, you have something you need to do, or you have something that you need to do. I think that's kind of the other thing is, once we have all this stuff in here, you have your consistency. What do I need to do? Well, we already kind of have some of that in here. It's just like you said, Barry, but like on the bottom right, you can see I've actually got a few things I've got to get done. But I think we can do a better job of even making it easier if you give a portal to someone and they log in, they'll probably know what they need to know what they're looking at, and they need to know if there's anything they need to do.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Unless anybody else has more stuff, obviously feel free to keep the chit chat going, because we're not going to cut it off. But I think I'm done with my big spiel. The last bit I had, which was already in the poll, was really just the poll time. You're answering it. Next month's office hours are going to be derived off of the answers. So the big TBD is TBD with the poll results. I don't necessarily have a soapbox. Usually, I went in on storefront this month. I might cover a little bit more next month, but I'm seeing a lot of questions for content management strategies and company groups and best practices. That's a lot of the stuff that we want to open up with the API. So I'm happy to talk about that, but we'll see once we roll in the results from the Microsoft forum and stuff. Anybody else have anything else on the video side, either Evan or Dave? Otherwise, I may adjourn us a little bit early so everyone can get a 10-minute break.
No, nothing particular for me.
Sounds good.
Nothing for me.
I think we got all the questions answered too.
Good. Well, no, we literally started a giant snowball of stuff to answer, but yes, we've answered.
Well, the ones that are physically on page right now on the chat, digitally on the chat, I think we're good.
This is a big enough deal to us. I'll say this too. This is a big enough deal to us that a lot of times when we talk about stuff during office hours, it's like, hey, topic du month, shoot du jour, right? Whatever. I think the API warrants enough of attention where we might want to just add that as a segment, say progress, what we're thinking, how we're doing. So take this as a commitment to just understanding where we're at with how it's working, so we can let you know the strategy of it. So we're going to see more about this. This is not necessarily a one-off. So this is going to be kind of a change in how we operate, but I think hopefully for the better. And again, as we work on more stuff, as we work on like the partner center concept that we mentioned a while ago, you'll learn more about that and you'll see some of that. So we want to use these to be as transparent as possible about what we're working on and stuff. So more show.
Chris,
There's one question in the chat from Chris about the updating of the
I was just
content.
about to say, for bigger brains. What is the status of updating university content for bigger brains?
So
Ricky's the perfect guy to answer this.
I'm the guy, because I have to do the painful thing of taking their courses and adding it in there. So the latest thing about content, and forgive me if you've heard this before, but I'll tell you exactly where we're at, is that Bigger Brains changed their format, which is a good thing for them and not such a good thing for us. Meaning that when they gave us courses prior, aka let's say now, they gave us in a very specific package that I personally loaded up, took the screenshots, did all the stuff, whatever, and then loaded up their modules. They changed it to look a lot nicer, and it has built-in courses and quizzes and all that stuff in there. The problem is, and again, it's not really their problem, it's our problem, is that their courses have become, I want to say it's 6 or 7 times larger than they used to be, which means that when they add 14 or 15 courses, a content package that's already 200 plus now becomes even beefier, and it becomes slower to push out and all the other stuff. In addition to the fact that I don't know how we're tracking the course completion inside of the Bigger Brains courses as well. So what we're doing with them is we literally just finalized a new type of pricing with them, which, spoiler alert, should be better. And then what we're doing is we're doing the same approach as clip training, where we're going to SSO into the Bigger Brains portal, just like we're doing for clip training, to alleviate us of all that stuff. So the thought process there was no more having to update content, same exact process as this. But the caveat to that is just because you SSO it and you get the users to complete their courses isn't complete, right? We have this thing with Bigger Brain or clip training. The reason I'm not going clip training is all done and we're good is because the last bit to this puzzle that we need is we need a training API to loop back around and add the training results back into CloudRadial, because we do want the course completion, the student, percentages and whatnot back in here. Because if we don't have this, then we can't really report on it. And really it's the reporting. Like we do want accessibility, but all that stuff. So Bigger Brains is on the part where I think they're working on they actually have to open up their API to get the training results. And then we're kind of using them in clip training as a mold, because once they both have the right training data sent back to us, we're going to loop that back in and add it in there. So right now we're working with them on opening up the API. That's exactly where they stand. And Bigger Brains hasn't gotten a course update in a while because, again, we're not going to stop them from producing their new quality courses, but we need them in a different standard, which is why we're just saying, let's just show them in your portal and avoid the content publishing kerfuffle. That's where that's at. Good question.
The ETA on that?
Don't know, because I think that between the partner center stuff that we're working on, the API project, it's still API, but it's not the same API that we have for the rest of the stuff. Like we've been working on, or we've been thinking about the training stuff a lot longer than we have the stuff that we've been talking about today. So like talking about RMM and endpoints and stuff, there hasn't even begun to make progress. I think Jeff has some stuff on that, but I don't know the ETA, frankly.
I don't know the ETA either, but I do have Bigger Brains SSO on my list and some of those other pieces as well. So
that was
it's
a priority
list, but it's a big list, but that is one of the noteworthy items that's on it.
Yeah, but it's been a thing for a long time. And again, I don't know if how long Chris has been using CloudRadial, but like it's been something that I personally dealt with, because when I first built the content package for Bigger Brains courses, it was like 60 courses. And then we had like a big like aha moment when it was like 150 that we changed the distribution method. So when you publish them, because publishing that would just end up failing because it was just too big of a content package. So we changed some stuff that got better, but like we're in a weird transitionary period where it's been like this for a while, but it's been a mixture of us needing to open up APIs. And again, all the consideration you saw, but also it's working with Bigger Brain specifically to open up their API, which they don't have any for their training stuff. So I'm not sure the ETA, not just because of us, but also because it's on them to open some stuff up, frankly.
And also, Jasper wanted to know about a specific feature request in regards to integrating with QuickBooks Online. So, I mean, just based on everything that we've been talking about and working on, direct integrations with vendors, unless like they're really, really, have high priority or urgent, we're kind of putting on the back burner, hoping that opening up the API is going to give you more capabilities or like an integration that you're looking for. So we don't have anything specific for that request at the moment, but we can always consider anything. So we'll definitely review it for you, and you'll get an update on the request itself.
The QuickBooks one has always been interesting to me. Sorry, Dave, were you saying something?
Oh, I was just gonna say I did answer in the chat or message or mentioned in the chat. One of the things I'm doing as I'm getting up to speed is going through everything that's in that list of ideas, in terms of recency, in terms of number of votes, but also just to wrap my head around what everyone's looking for. So I can't commit to.
So if you add a comment,
I'm going through the list.
Yeah, so if you add a comment and he's on those, I think he's on a lot of them now. And adding comments will update things and trigger notifications and things. So if there's anything you want him to, see first that may be older, it'll definitely help.
Yep.
I will say anecdotally for Jasper about any kind of financial stuff. When we looked at a lot of the financial integrations, because like we've talked to a couple different vendors, like I talked to Benji Pays. I don't know if anyone's heard of them, but they're super nice. They wanted to work with us, and it was like a couple of different flavors of integration. Same thing with QuickBooks, where it's like ultimately, if you want to have some kind of generic, like let's just say a payments thing, right? Do invoices. there's the level of integration where it's like we can pull some of their invoices in there, and that would be defining exactly what it looks like. Is it a quote? Is it a PDF or whatever? Or just having SSO into the payment portal is most likely what we'll do, because that seems to be the better case. So there's going to be a standard set. So again, the reason for the use cases, and again, financial ones are fantastic, is because we can determine the best approach to all those. So keep in mind that when you put your use case and you start writing stuff out and you start giving us like the stuff, if you can, and if you think about it, try to be specific of like, do you really need XYZ data in there, or do you need a quick access to it? Because again, up to you on how we do it. It's fine either way. We just want to know what would be actually expected and beneficial for you, but that's a good one too. Thank you. Again, not an end conversation. We'll keep talking through these for the rest of it. And again, if you think of anything else, if anything else pops up, usually by the end of the day, or worst case scenario, I usually do it the day after, you'll see that pop up saying like, hey, thanks for showing up. This is just going to be a link to the Microsoft form poll. And then that's usually up for around 2 weeks. I do that just because people can't put a bunch of stale data, but that'll have the exact same thing we talked about during this conversation, exact same question sets. If we change your answer, want to put more votes in something else, you can get 2. Don't tell the for people watching the recording. And then you can write out your use case there too. And that's what we're going to personally review. So please let us know. And thank you guys. I appreciate you joining us for another office hours, and I'll catch you for the next one next month.
All right. Take care, guys.
All right. See you guys. Have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.